Hi, welcome back to another episode of Making Action Happen. I am Sara Blackhurst.
And I am Brian McCain.
And we're going to do something a little bit different today. We had a really important meeting with our board of directors, and we were already in this fight, but we've got some big concerns. And our board has some really big concerns on some of the efforts that we've been seeing, some of the trends to remove natural gas and propane from the energy portfolio for Colorado. And we know how negatively impactful that would be for our community. So we wanted to just have a conversation today. And so instead of us asking the questions, we're going to let Micah ask the questions of us today. So he's going to get to put on the Socratic bully hat that I usually wear. And Brian's here to put the brakes on things because I feel pretty passionately about this. But he's been tracking this since way before Action 22 when he was with Scott Tipton's office. And we've been seeing these trends really, the heat has been turned up on that. So I'm going to let Micah ask questions. But before I do that, I just got to take a moment of executive privilege. You know, we at Action 22, you don't see behind the scenes a lot with Action 22 because we are always operating at a breakneck speed. And the three of us together, I believe in the power of three. The three of us together are constantly working on how all these issues that are coming up intersect with each other. And I just wanted to very publicly thank both of these gentlemen for the work that they do in supporting what our board's directives are and supporting me. It's not an easy thing to have to constantly talk about all of these things and figure out what needs to happen here or there. But I wanted both of you to know that I don't for a second take for granted the fact that if I could pick a dream team, that it would be the two of you. But it's not just for your knowledge and capabilities, but also for your heart for our community. And so I really want to take a second to highlight that because what we do isn't an easy thing. And I think we even take ourselves for granted and sometimes on that. And I wanted to talk about that because what we're going to talk about today is kind of heavy. Along that, what we really want to talk about today is sort of a follow-up for what currently the PUC is proposing with their clean heat plan. This is really complicated, and so just be patient with us as we sort of talk through all this because I'm talking a lot faster and about things, and I don't always stop to really explain what's happening on all of this. So, Micah, with that,
I have to preface the conversation with something real fast. Just so you know, the EPA, this is officially from the EPA website. They say that natural gas is a relatively clean burning fossil fuel. Burning natural gas for energy results in fewer emissions of nearly all types of air pollutants and carbon dioxide than burning coal or petroleum products to produce an equal amount of energy.
Yeah. So and if you're trying to figure out where that is, it's on the EPA's website, and they have a plan, a report that they did. And I think the latest data on it was 2020, but it lays out how to reduce emissions. So we're looking at that very seriously, and we're trying to compare or reconcile on some level what's happening here in Colorado. So,
and I could say this too, that some of the problems that the federal government, the EPA, has with natural gas is the extraction of it. And that's where you see a lot of the regulatory side from the federal side. It's not necessarily the burning of natural gas, but the extraction process. And, you know, we're not going to get into it, but everything from fracking to how they get it out of the ground. And that was where a lot of the issues came for against natural gas, saying that it was bad for the environment. But since then, there have been more efficient, cleaner ways to access natural gas in the ground. So that technology just in the past 10 years has grown leaps and bounds.
All right, Micah, we're going to give the mic to you to just ask all the questions that you have, because sometimes when you're so far in it, I don't even know where one idea begins and another one ends. So I've had difficulty explaining this.
Well, very good. And yes, I can tell you Sara is very passionate about this topic in particular. Earlier, we were on a call with a group that's also interested in this fight. And Sara talked for about 12 minutes straight without taking a breath, explaining this to well, this guy probably already knew.
He probably did.
But he was polite enough not to interrupt.
That was sweet of him.
When she started turning blue,
I think I kind of freaked him out a little bit. And talking about this, he was from California. He was calling in from California. And then the other person on the call was from Texas.
Yeah,
so
but the guy from California knew where Walsenburg is. And where
he has a
Canyon
cousin
City
in
is.
Walsenburg.
Yeah.
And his mom was like a teacher in Canyon City or something.
Something like that.
So he's from here.
So he understands our footprint a little bit better than perhaps some of the people in his neighborhood.
Yeah, it's just interesting that this is a nationwide discussion right now on how to do what we're talking about.
Well, I might start actually with Brian answering a question first.
Okay.
About what is the PUC and what's this clean air? Wait, what is it? Clean heat.
It's a clean heat plan.
All right, tell us about the PUC and the clean heat plan.
The PUC is the Public Utilities Commission, which Sarah's actually more familiar with how it works, but they're appointed, correct? The members of it?
They are.
And they're a group of people that they're basically the commission that governs utility companies in Colorado, correct?
And there's only 3 of them.
3 people on it. See, I didn't even know that.
And they're making these decisions for us.
And they're not elected, correct?
No.
And it's a commission.
Yes.
So there's not really an oversight on...
No.
How do you get appointed to the commission?
You have to know the right people. So the governor appoints who's on the PUC. And once they're appointed...
is there like a term length on this?
There is, but like if somebody's doing something or it's not working or whatever, it's not like there's an election to get them off. When there's a new governor, he can put them on. But other than that, there's usually a new PUC with every new administration. So it is appointed. There's this whole idea of, we're going to appoint you to do this, but then we're not going to micromanage you, which I understand that perspective. That makes sense. But there's not a lot of checks and balances on that.
And just to make it official, so I'll be the computer guy or phone guy.
Yeah. Looking up the information.
My phone is a computer. My computer is my phone. The Colorado Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, serves the public interest by effectively regulating utilities and facilities so that the people of Colorado receive safe, reliable, and reasonably priced services consistent with the economic, environmental, and social values of our state.
Now, I believe that every state has a PUC. I'm pretty sure.
Or we're one of the last
something
ones
similar.
to have.
Yeah, it's something similar.
No, we are the last ones to one of the last ones to have a statewide energy, not an energy plan, but a statewide. Here's what you're going to do.
And they're under the Department of Regulatory Affairs, correct?
So that's DOLA
or DORA.
DORA. Sorry, DORA.
Yeah.
So just really quick, Colorado has a limit on how many departments you have. So the Department of Regulatory Affairs, the Department of Local Affairs, the Department of Transportation, you can only have so many. I think it's 12 in Colorado.
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a limited number.
It's a limited number, but there's no limit to the number of offices that you can have. So you can have an office of information technology, an office of broadband, an office of, you can have as many offices under each department as they see fit. There's also, so Colorado is unique in their fiscal policy with regard to you can't raise taxes was one of the things. You can't raise taxes without everybody approving it.
Tabor.
So, yep, it's called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, or as we call it around here, Tabor, and every place else in the state. But there's a lot of other provisions in Tabor. The idea was to keep government small. When it was instituted back in the day, it was to keep government small and to keep, fiscal policy very conservative, to just pay for a few things. So there was this whole thing of we're going to do this. Now, 30 years later, literally 30 years later, there's been some ways that they'll work around it. So now we have a lot of offices and we have a lot of bureaucracy.
Also, it's important to add that Colorado has a balanced budget.
That's right.
So the budget has to be balanced. You can't spend more money than you're taking in Colorado.
So with the growth that we've seen in Colorado in the last 30 years, it's trying to catch up. It's always trying to play catch up with the policies.
Right.
So we're always a little bit behind. That's why there's always a fight over education. There's always a fight over transportation. There's always a fight over these things that 30 years ago were like, well, obviously we need to pay for education. Obviously we need to pay for this, but you can't grow. So Colorado, in addition, is a growth pays for itself.
Mm-hmm. Which means?
You can't take out, a government can't take out a loan for growth.
Okay.
So because we have to have a balanced budget. So you can't, like the state can't take out a loan for, for example, the Olympics are here, going to be in Colorado. So we're going to take out a big loan to put all the infrastructure that's needed in place to do that. That doesn't happen. So,
okay.
So it's again it was created at a time that everybody was very fiscally conservative in Colorado, but that was 92, I think, is when Tabor was put into place.
Wow. So back to the PUC.
Back to the PUC.
Clean heat plan.
Heat plan.
What's the actual goal of this clean heat plan? I mean, how far do we have to go to be clean and warm?
So the idea is really... and the governor's, this is an important thing to the governor. He said it from the very beginning, but it was that Colorado would have zero emissions by 35?
Yeah, reduced to a certain percentage by 35, and I think past that it would be zero. So basically, Colorado is going to be the model for renewable energy and zero emissions.
Really what the governor would like to see, and I think a lot of Coloradans would like to see. I would love it if Colorado was zero emissions, was the first state in the union to be zero emissions.
Sure.
My problem is with how we go about that, and that's really the question at hand, is how do we go about becoming a zero emission state without just being totally devastating the state.
How would that devastate the state? Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that are happening right now. There's a lot of work, especially in the Action 22 footprint, with regard to, and it should be, but clean energy, renewable energy. This is a really great place. This whole area could be sort of the breadbasket, if you will, for renewable and clean energy. There's a lot of emerging, innovative, developing science and technology to go along with that. What needs to happen is the time to be able to develop that in a way that not only is zero emission, but also blesses and benefits the state. Mm-hmm. So let me give you, and I'm going to go off on this just a little bit.
And for the record, the two largest sources of emissions in Colorado are electric power and transportation. So that's 50% of all carbon emissions in Colorado are power and transportation.
And what the EPA report said, this was interesting because that's the case. that natural gas being cleaner is the way to reduce the emissions. That's what they say. If you're going to reduce emissions from producing electricity, you need to move to natural gas.
And that's part of the, getting off of coal, basically. And they say dirty coal, clean coal. But the idea from the federal standpoint is we want to get off of coal power as much as possible through other means, and that could be renewable energy. But one thing that the EPA and the feds have said is, natural gas is a good step towards that, and it's kind of like a stopgap. Like ideally, we want to go to all complete renewables. So, wind, electricity. We'll throw the nuclear out there, even though it's not considered a renewable. It is one of the cleanest sources of power, but that's a whole other conversation.
By the way, the EPA does say that. That's the other thing. The EPA says nuclear energy.
Yeah, they do. And there's plenty of nuclear power plants in the United States that are still functioning and working, and that technology's grown. But anyway, they're saying, hey, look, we got to get off of coal. Coal is bad for the environment. The emissions are terrible. It's one of the worst out there. Same thing with gas, oil, cars. And that's why you're seeing this push to go to the electric vehicles. But as far as power generation, it's like, okay, let's get off coal, but let's kind of concentrate on natural gas while everything else catches up to that. We can't just go completely renewable right now. That's impossible. And even Colorado recognizes that to a point. They set up some benchmarks in the future to get closer to that zero emissions on it. But where Colorado comes in with it, they're like, we need to transition off of natural gas and go to electricity. So we need to take out your gas stove, your gas heater, and put in electric heat pumps, put in electric stoves, get off of propane. A lot of our rural community, they still use propane. It's cheap, it's affordable, and people don't make a lot of money in our area. But the state wants to transition people off of anything gas in their house. And this doesn't just go for residential, but commercial as well, and go to straight electrical as soon as possible.
So we had this conversation during the last session because we saw a lot of this last legislative session, and both of you, were on the receiving end of one of my tirades because I can't be like that with everybody. I can be like that with you and say, help me understand this or help me figure out how to do something. One of the things that I think it was a real turning point for me this last session. It was actually from you. I was thinking about some of the legislation that had been introduced with good intent. And let me just say this, and I do believe this in my heart. I'm not just blowing smoke. I really do believe there's not a single legislator that I've talked to, elected official that I've talked to, that does not run for office because they want to make a difference, because they want to do and make things better, and they want it's a pure of heart, right? I've yet to meet somebody who's run for office on the state level for a state seat that they were like, well, I'm just running to break stuff. That just doesn't happen. Or I hate Colorado and I'm running because I hate Colorado and I wreck stuff. So that's not the case. They really do have a heart for it. When you get up there and you start to operate in at the Instapot of 100 or 700 bills in 120 days, of course things are going to start to get foggy and fuzzy for you. I remember there was some shenanigans that I didn't like, and there's some legislation that got introduced this last session that had my hair on fire because I constantly worry about laying awake nights worrying about our 22 counties and our communities. And I said something, I was playing with the idea of writing something about, I wonder if there's a way for us, in 700 bills, for there to be some kind of a rubrics or something that would say sort of the idea of first do no harm. In the medical community, it was, you think first do no harm. So can we look at the bill before we introduce it and go, okay, I need to check here to see what harm this bill would do before, I send it up and to get introduced, or before I put my name on it or something. Couldn't there be something to do that? And I started thinking about first, do no harm, if we could do that. And I was talking with you about it, and you looked at me and because I said, in the medical community, this is it. And you looked at me and you had this look on your face. You go, that's the very basic standard of care. That's like the lowest standard of care is first, do no harm in the medical community. And I got that feeling in my throat where, I don't know whether I'm going to cry or throw up when you said that, because I was thinking, if we stopped to do that, and in the medical community, we're still talking about people's lives here. Can we not do that exact thing? And it was really around this, how do we reduce emissions without it breaking the backs of Coloradans? So now fast forward to, there was legislation, there was, and I can't think of the bill number now. I never remember the bill numbers 30 days after the session, but it was the statewide building code that we really fought hard against. A lot of states will have something like this, but it's a very basic, it's the basic standard. Right. This turns that up. And it's all around natural gas. So Colorado's done a very effective job of either getting rid of coal altogether, or it's on its way out, like coal's on its way out. So then now we're talking about natural gas, but now we're going to go after natural gas. At the same time that we're going after natural gas, and let me just say, the PUC, I was at a PUC meeting, and the PUC chair very adamantly said that they had no plans to ban natural gas. Okay. However, it's that workaround again. We're not going to ban natural gas. We're just going to price it out of the equation. We're going to make it so that nobody can afford to install natural gas. Or if your gas stove goes out, you're not going to be able to get another gas stove. This is what we're talking about. So, the reason that we're so passionate about this is because we know there are ways to make certified net zero natural gas in mass very affordably without adding this other burden.
Right.
So that's where, and when I talk about burden, we're talking about a huge cost burden. So there's three or four things that we talk about all the time, or that we hear our members talk about, their concerns all the time. It's especially during an election year. But the three of them that are top of mind for everybody right now is the economy and what things are going to cost. Housing is huge. We can't get past the housing, and then other things aren't related to this necessarily, but that's public safety, but jobs, workforce, all of those things, the benefits cliff, all of these things are related in that what we're doing with trying to eradicate a certain energy source, it's going to add cost burden. And yet people are still trying to push this over like somehow they're going to spend less money if they don't have natural gas in the equation. So
why do you think people, how does that thought process work to think it's not going to cost them more money?
I don't know.
Because and then let me ask you this, because obviously if we were to go all electric, like Brian said, there's those two main sources of emissions.
Yeah.
And obviously the governor's office has made some pretty aggressive moves on the transportation side, and even, moving towards grants with, to install charging stations, also solving those problems. Because I'm with you, having a net zero thing, that sounds great.
That sounds fantastic.
And we've had friends and family who have really bad issues like asthma and things like that. Those also, I lived in Utah for a long time where they actually have an inversion where the air just gets trapped up against the mountains. And so the smog is insane. in areas like that.
Like Denver.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. So what are the problems that we have with going to all electric?
Okay. You go first, Brian, and then I'll jump in.
And I'll play the advocate why natural gas isn't as clean as everybody says. But first off, so if you go all electric, one, you can't afford it. A lot of people live on fixed income, specifically in rural Colorado, and they have propane tanks, one, because that's the cheapest way to heat their house and cook.
How much would it cost a household to go all electric?
Anywhere between, it depends. I've read as low as 7,000 to as high as 20,000.
Okay.
So I do know somebody that they took out all the gas, they put in an electric stove and an electric heater, and it ended up costing them around $17,000. But their electric bill during the winter doubled, almost tripled to keep the house. And to be fair, it's a big house. And so on top of that, say we'll just round it up to like $17,000 to $20,000. They're spending almost $390 during the winter months for their heat bill. Mm-hmm. Now you could say, well, what about the gas bill? And natural gas prices fluctuate more. So you could have a good year, you could have a bad year. Your gas bill can go up quite a bit, or it can drop, and it's not as stable as people think it is. But that person was spending around $100 a month to heat their house on natural gas. So you figure, from $100 up to $300 and some a month with electric, and it didn't work as well. As you could say it like with your air conditioner, look at your electric bill in the summer if you have central air versus the winter. Now imagine that central air bill hitting you 12 months out of the year.
Right.
Because it takes more energy to heat than I think the air conditioning side. But so you're looking $20,000 up front and then an additional probably like a couple thousand a year for your bill.
Wow.
And then that also puts a strain on the grid as well. That's another issue. You look at California, where they're telling people not to charge their electric cars and to turn off the air conditioner because it's just too much on the grid to keep up with it.
Well, what about like in Texas last year where?
Yeah, that was a total mismanagement of the power grid. There's a lot. That's a
lot of issues, but if we're talking every house is only electric.
Yes.
What happens in Lamar, Colorado if everything freezes over?
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing it now just with air conditioners. They're saying, don't run here in Colorado. There's been a few towns that they have asked people. They're not forcing them to do it. It's like, only run your air conditioner when you're home. Don't run it when you're gone because it's just too much. It's kind of like water too. During the summer when we're in a drought, we haven't seen it here in Pueblo recently, but we've seen it before where it's like, you can only water your grass Monday and Wednesday versus 4 days a week. So imagine the electric grid being stressed so hard that they're going to be like, well, you can only heat your house for 6 hours a day versus, 24 hours. And then tie into, we have another COVID outbreak and everybody's working from home. And you have your kids at home and it's negative 27 degrees out in Alamosa and you got a house full of kids and you're running your heat all day. That's just not an option to turn it off during that time.
Right.
So let me tell you, we were having this discussion. So I told my mom, and we were talking about this, and I said, you need to look at what we're talking about here. So she sent me this earlier today. She didn't know we were doing the show today. She said, you are so right. I just had my propane delivered. Now propane has gone up dramatically in price. It's more than doubled in the last year. That's an artificial push, to make it. There was no real reason to make it, that much more expensive, but it was. But even at that, I just had my propane delivered, got my last delivery, August 18th of, she meant 21, but it was 20, she meant 21, but it was 22 is what she said. 160 gallons or 160.5 gallons. At $2.40, my hot water stove and heater cost me $369.15. That averages out to $30.77 a month. That's $1.01 a day. Now, I know what her bill is, her electric bill. And so she's not really running anything spectacular on her electric bill. Her electric bill is $60 a month.
Right.
So she's hardly running anything on it. And she's paying more than twice that. She's paying twice that a month for her electric bill. So this is a woman who is surviving on my dad's Social Security.
Right.
So this is the burden the burden that we're talking about on the lowest, on that frontline level. Now, I genuinely think that the governor started asking the same questions I was asking, in that, how do we really make a difference on emissions? What do we really need to do? Lately, we've seen him doubling down on electric vehicles. He's putting a lot of money toward electric vehicles. Now, I can make an argument either way on electric vehicles.
Sure.
But the reason that he's looking at that instead of very publicly doubling down on natural gas, he's very publicly doubling down on electric vehicles on the transportation side, is because as far as emissions go in Colorado, we're not even clicking it. Like, I could not find anywhere where it said natural gas produces this much emissions. Our biggest emitters in Colorado are transportation.
Right.
And power generation.
But there's not a lot right now you can do about power generation, but there are things you can do on the transportation side.
Well, and that's easy. I mean, I think it's wrong to treat them as one and the same, because just about everybody replaces their car every few years. Everybody.
Right.
You just do. I mean, cars give out. You don't replace your house. Most of us don't replace our house every 5 years.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
I don't replace my car every few years. Sitting on a bag of money over there buying cars.
Most people.
Right.
Brian doesn't fit into a lot of most people categories.
But you're right. You're gonna replace your car multiple times before you replace your house.
Sure.
Yes.
I mean, even look at your mom. How many cars has she had while she's been in that house?
Right.
She's been there like 45 years.
Yeah, right. How many cars have I had since I've been at our current house? Right. It's the same.
How many cars do you have out there right now?
There's so many cars. So many cars.
I'm gonna throw it back. So, put on my environmentalist cap, right?
Okay.
I don't want to see any fossil fuels burned at all. They're bad. They need to go away. We need to figure something else out. The technology is getting there. So natural gas, it actually, they say it burns cleaner, but it still emits some carbon, and quite a bit compared to solar or wind.
Sure.
It's released if you're generating power with natural gas. There are CO2 emissions that are released in the atmosphere. But the big one is like methane, right? So it's leaked out when they're extracting and transporting of natural gas, because it leaks. Nothing's perfect. So there are leaks in a pipe. I get it that the utility companies are trying to fix that to stop the leaks, but also look at the transportation side of it. So to move this natural gas, it takes diesel trucks, and a lot of them. With coal, we saw that the trains, just here in Pueblo, it's nonstop trains to Comanche Power Plant. And that pollutes the environment and the trucks. And moving natural gas just creates more transportation emissions on top of the natural gas bad emissions to the environment. So that's why we kind of need to get off of that and go into a more electric-based system.
So while you have your environmentalist cap on, can I beat up on you a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So true or false, the technology is there to create zero or net zero emissions with natural gas.
Nothing is net zero.
Okay.
Even renewables are not net zero, because there has to be, no matter what we do when it comes to energy, there's going to be pollutants. So they say net zero, but realistically it's not net zero. But the net zero from non-natural gas power generation, renewable energies, is closer to zero than actual natural gas.
So do we have the capacity in the next 5 years to completely replace natural gas with a 100% renewables? Will the grid support that, especially when you're thinking about the number of electric cars that are going to be going, electric vehicles are going to be going on the roads?
No, we don't. And that's why we need to invest money and build up the infrastructure for transmission lines. Like that needs to be done first. I think everybody agrees that.
Agree. Yeah.
Whether or not we're burning motor oil on the side of the road to generate power or it's wind power, we do need to fix the grid.
The transmission.
I hate to say fix the grid. That's like,
no, we just have to update it.
The transmitting that power from A to B is, that's where we're losing a lot of it.
That has to happen.
But even with incentives to get off of fossil fuels, and there are plenty of incentives to get off of fossil fuels, we're not seeing it happen fast enough. And this is where the government really needs to come in and kind of take charge. It's like, the highway system or the railroad. Like, okay, there's incentives for it, but it didn't happen until we made it happen. And if me being the government, if I were the government, it's like, okay, look, guys, we really need to do this now because our future's at stake. Global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. We can all agree something's happening because it's hot as hell right now and we're in a drought. So we have to do everything right now to cut back on that. And if that means forcing natural gas, fossil fuels out, it's a good cause to be behind because we're fighting for the future. This isn't about us. This is about our kids.
So I would just ask with that, then why not all this effort being made to make what the infrastructure is cleaner?
Like, what do you mean the infrastructure?
So net zero and I say, you say there's no such thing as net zero. Yeah. We're going to get as close as anything else to net zero on natural gas, but also to make the lines that are already there more efficient, methane capture, those kinds of things. Why are we not focusing more on that and making things cleaner to really genuinely be an example of how other places could do that instead of trying to remove this huge part of that energy portfolio completely out of the mix?
We've tried, but the utility companies won't do what we want.
Who's we?
The government.
So
no, and I think that like realistically, like that's a big part of it too. So, our grid isn't nationalized, right? It is owned by utility companies, transmission companies, both public and private, and there's many of them out there. So it's hard to get all the pieces into place. We can incentivize that, but when it comes down to it, like we can't force it to happen. Like I cannot be the government and say like, we're building new transmission lines. You need to do it now.
So I understand that.
But they can do that to the end user?
Right?
That's what we're talking about. Literally. Yeah. Like they're forcing the end user to make that switch over instead.
Yeah, which would in turn force the rest of it.
So So it's on the backs of people like my mom, or these other community members, when it would be far more efficient, cost effective, and have better technology if they would focus on making it better instead of removing it altogether.
And to be fair, the utility companies are doing everything they can to make it better.
They are.
Yeah. Because if I'm a utility company and I have a natural gas line, I don't want it leaking. I do not want an environmental spill to happen. Like that's another complaint.
It's bad business.
And I agree with this 100%, like not even in character, that up until about 10 years ago, there were a lot of problems with everything from fracking to storage to, moving the fossil fuel here and there. And we saw accidents happen, but in 10 years' time, the utility companies have really, really done a great job of ensuring that doesn't happen anymore. In fact, the worst environmental disaster in Colorado in recent history was caused by the government.
Right.
It was the EPA that caused it. Like, of all things, the EPA, they uncapped a mine. It was a subcontractor of a contractor, like went to check a mine plug, and then all this yellow water started coming out, and then in southwestern Colorado, and we're driving to work and we're like, why is the river yellow? And that accident was caused by the people there to protect the environment. So the worst environmental thing in Colorado was actually caused by the government.
Yeah.
In recent history, not of all time. I'm talking like the past decade or so.
So were those improvements the last 10 years, was that based on regulations, or was that just based on people wanting to avoid another accident?
It's everything, right? Obviously, you don't want to cause an accident. And I don't think any utility company, and if I'm wrong, like, please, if you know of a utility company that's like the bad guy from Captain Planet that just likes to pollute stuff out there to pollute stuff. No, they don't want to do that.
It's bad business for them to do it.
It always cracks me up with they accuse people of polluting the environment or, spraying chemicals in the air, or dumping stuff in the river, and the people live there. It's like, why would I be doing this where I live? I'm not going to pollute my own backyard. So they don't want to pollute. It's just they recognize the mistakes, and there's always going to be a mistake no matter what it is going forward, whether you're a shoe factory to a nonprofit to anything. Mistakes will be made. And you look back at those mistakes and you fix it to make sure anything like that won't happen again to the best of your ability. So that's what the utility companies did. And I'm not calling out any utility companies here in Colorado. I'm talking about the Exxon Valdez, oil spill, the big one that caught on fire down there.
The rivers that you can light on fire.
Yeah, stuff like that. Right now, I don't think anybody wants to pollute the environment. Maybe in the 70s and 80s, they didn't care so much, right. but we're talking now. And this is always brought up too when you have the environmental side, and this could be said with anything. It's like, this isn't going to pollute the environment. This is safe. We're going to run this oil pipeline through the woods. Nothing's going to spill. And they'll say, well, it has spilled and history repeats itself. It's like, okay. And that's a fair argument. Like, yeah, it's happened a lot in the past, but it is heavily regulated now and it doesn't happen as much, but it's probably going to happen again. And then, so why do it? Like, if we know it's going to happen again, why build an oil pipeline? Why, build a natural gas pipeline? We know it's going to happen. Let's do everything we can to stop it from happening and transition it to renewables, where a windmill is not going to spill oil. A solar panel is not going to leak methane gas into the air.
Well, I think that's one of your biggest concerns with this whole plan, right? Is that transition aspect?
The transition. So let me, along that idea, the transition part of it, but really the difference between the government forcing and voluntarily making the changes.
And the government doesn't force. Like that's another thing too. They are putting out mandates, recommendations, and setting up policy. But in defense of the government is not saying we're banning natural gas, you can't have it anymore. But they're creating roadblocks to make it more difficult for gas to be used.
Okay. Well, and some of those roadblocks are just, I'm sorry, they're economically insurmountable. And they know that.
Yes.
So I'm really pointing the finger at the PUC on this one, because I want them to really think about the harm versus what the outcomes will be. But let me tell you, it's been interesting. Again, the governor's really been wanting to push a lot of, just better environmental. And the truth of the matter is that all Coloradans, there's not a single Coloradan I know that's not at heart an environmentalist on some level. But here's the difference between when you let people voluntarily make changes versus regulating them into a hole. And I know that's strong language, and I don't apologize for that at all. So there were some benchmarks that were set, goals that were set with regard to, we want to hit this, we want to hit this, we want to hit this. Right. So the utilities come in and they're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And they sit down and they look at where they can cut. They look at where technology is, where they invest some of their money into developing what technologies. And time and again, and I mean, this isn't sustainable, but time and again, a goal is set and they say, okay, we'll see your goal and we'll raise you. We can do better in this way and this way. And it's the timeline of their benchmarks or their overall emissions or whatever. The problem lies in that every time that happens, they go, oh, you can do that then. Okay, well then let's change the rules. Let's change this. And you have to run all of us through us because, and again, I'm throwing hands on this, but if you were genuinely concerned about Coloradans, you would look at ways to develop cleaner rather than take something away and add burden. Sure. But time and again, you'll see that the ones who are driving these technologies to make it cleaner are actually the utilities.
Right.
And they're the private-owned utilities. They're the investor-owned utilities that are supposed to be the bad guys, or the co-ops. They're supposed to be the bad guys. They're the ones that are investing because, remember, Colorado is a growth pays for itself. Mm-hmm. So literally, the state can put incentives like what Brian said, but they can't make investment. Mm-hmm. They can just help out. That's all that they're really empowered to do is incentives to help that out. So why not take the money and the incentives and say, we're going to do this, electric cars. I love it. If we could afford an electric car right now, if we have the space to do it, if we could do that. But again, the grid won't bear us removing a major part of the energy production while simultaneously adding to that in a way that we really don't have a crystal ball. We don't really know what all those impacts are going to be.
Right. And there are improvements coming to the grid. There are utility companies that are working on that because that's been asked for a long time. And I wholeheartedly believe that our area, the Action 22 footprint, is going to become like one of the solar capitals of the country. And there's
which we love.
Out there.
Yeah, we love that.
Yeah. But to like stay on track to kind of put everything together, what we're talking about. So there was an interview with you where the PUC is proposing that any new buildings or houses, right now it's split. So if you have to install a gas line to a house or a building or a business or whatever, residential and commercial, it's split 50-50, right? So, so the developer pays for half of that and the utility company pays for the other half.
Yeah.
And they want to shift it completely on the developer. So the developer pays for 100% of that. Correct?
Correct. So this is.
And again, who's they?
Oh, the PUC.
Okay. PUC.
As part of their clean heat plan.
And so what the motivation behind that is that one, the savings to the average person, what they argue is that whenever a utility company has to spend money to build out to a building or a facility or whatever, they put the cost on the user, right, the customer. So if there's all this new development going on in Colorado and they're putting in all these gas lines to these houses and businesses or whatever, they're going to pay for half of that, and then they're going to put that cost on the ratepayers and raise their bill, their utility bill.
I've got to pull up the headline for this article where I was interviewed. But go ahead.
So what the PUC is saying, no, this will save the ratepayer money because that cost won't go on them. But on what I think is happening is it's like, okay, so you want gas? All right, you're building your house, you got to pay for 100%, or the company that's building the house, or contracting agency building a building, and they're going to say like, wait, what? 100%? I got to pay for all of this, which is not cheap. Well, I'll just make everything electric so I don't have to pay for this gas line going in, and then that gets rid of the gas going into that facility. Now, if you still want your gas and you're building somewhere and you may or may not can afford the electricity, say gas is part of your product. So say it's a business that needs gas for their manufacturing, or a restaurant. If I want to build a restaurant up the road and they have to put in a gas line to it, because as we know, in a restaurant, you don't want to cook with electric stoves. What did Beasley call it? Easy bake oven restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want an easy bake oven in my restaurant. I want a gas fired stove to cook all this stuff. But it's going to cost me like $200,000 to put this line in. Like, I can't afford that. I could afford the $100,000, but not $200,000 to put it in.
No, there's no way you can do that. So this is the funny part of this. I'm going to read the first part of this article to you. And this, again, was put out by CBS 4 out of Denver in Colorado. The Colorado Public Utility Commission is considering a rule change that some environmentalists say is fairer to utility customers. The rule change would impact who pays for new natural gas utility lines when new homes are built. Currently, the cost is shared 50-50 between the utility company and the developer. The change would put 100% on the developer. Some argue the change, which is still open to public comment, would help customers save money on utility bills because utility companies often pass off those costs through the customer fees. Okay, so I sent this article out to a number of people. I didn't put any proviso on it. I just said, hey, I was interviewed in this. Tell me what you think. And every single one of them, they said it all a different way, but they all said the exact same thing. How do you figure that putting the cost completely on the developer is going to save anybody any money? Do they really think that we are this stupid? I'm
yes.
I'm like, apparently, yes.
This is something that I've spoke about on the show and we've talked about. This is legislating through rulemaking.
Yes.
This is legislating through a body that is not elected by making rules. We saw it with the IRS. We've seen it with other agencies, both state, federal, and local on this, but that's basically what it is. And their end goal is we want to get off fossil fuels. So how can we make it harder to put fossil fuel stuff in places?
And to me, it seems so simple. Yes, let's get off fossil fuels. It's going to take us some time. In the meantime, let's make what we do have cleaner.
Well, this regulation, proposed regulation, it's still open for comment.
It's a rule, yeah.
Yeah, it's a rule.
Open rule.
But it's a rule, but it is open for comment, and at least the PUC is taking comment, and they are going around and having conversations. They're having community conversations, and then, we'll submit public input. But just to give you a little perspective on this, this sort of bizarre, surreal thing happened at the meeting here in Pueblo. And I feel like a total jerk because I actually can't remember his name right now, but he's one of the most aggressive, vocal advocates for environmental justice. He's a take no prisoners. There's nobody, and because there's people that are disproportionately impacted, and he's not wrong. He's very, very, he gets away with saying things I would never be able to say. But even he was opposed to this to a pretty strong degree with this heat plan, and it was for two reasons. One, it's very clear when we're having a housing crisis, when the cost of everything is going up so dramatically. And I want Brian to talk about that in just a second, about Colorado in particular, the inflation rates in Colorado right now, with those costs, on our mom just sitting there saying, hey, my propane bill doubled, but it's still this, and it would be this with all electric. Disproportionately impacted communities. Not only that, but the jobs it would cost, when the answer to me is so much simpler in we're right there, make it cleaner, make it voluntary. If somebody wants to go all electric with their house and they can afford it. But what he said, and I wrote it down, this environmental justice champion, he said it's going to be a question of who can afford to heat their house. And when we're talking about disproportionately impacted communities, those are the ones that are going to suffer the most. If my mom was on all electric, and she supplements with a wood burning stove, which we provide the wood for,
which is terrible for the environment.
But what's the choice?
I know.
What's the choice?
I read somewhere that it was fuel burning stoves in the world are one of the largest contributors to childhood death and illness.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I'm not talking about your fireplace in your house. It still pollutes, but
it's still, yeah.
But it's like in areas where you're burning inside, you're around a lot of burning. But
I still have scars from our kerosene heater growing up.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. So when we're talking about that, but when the electricity goes out in the middle of a winter storm in Colorado, what do?
Yep.
Yeah.
What are you supposed to do?
Yep.
Get the blankets out.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the oil and gas industry really dropped off in Colorado in recent times in the past 20 years. So a lot of these people that worked in oil and gas, they're pipe fitters,
Right.
and that's a huge, especially here in Pueblo, that's like part of our economy. And then if you see less and less gas, you see less and less of those jobs coming up.
Well, you do, and there's no replacement for those.
No.
And so the idea is like, oh, we'll put them back, we'll retrain, we'll do this, but what are you going to retrain a pipe fitter to do? Like the cost of that, and what's the interim for them?
Right.
There's one thing you could say, but it gets you banned off of social media.
Okay.
Learn to code. Don't put that on social media because then you get kicked off. Yeah, and
There's so many things
and
I don't know why.
Again, going back to the developer, we're in a housing crisis.
Oh my gosh.
Not necessarily like not enough houses, but there's no affordable houses or accessible. When you say affordable housing, people think, homeless or,
Yeah.
No, we're talking about the average person, average income in the region can't afford to buy a house right now and rents out the roof. So if you make it more expensive for a developer to build a new house because they have to have gas in it, it's just going to drive up that cost of housing.
Well, and I think now tell me if I'm wrong on this. We're talking about being disproportionately affected. If you're in Denver and building a 200 unit development and you got to pay to come out and run electric lines, that's one price. Wouldn't it be the same price for the 4 developing houses in one of our tiny communities?
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
Or probably more if you're running it further from the...
And I honestly think Denver, I don't think there's a lot of gas in Denver. Tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of it's electric heating and stuff, but it's a lot of apartments. But when in the residential areas, every house that I know of in Denver does not have a gas stove or a gas heater or water heater. It's all electric. So they've been doing it for a while. But
I can't think of the people that we know. I can't think of a single person that doesn't have a gas stove in.
But it's irrelevant.
Denver.
But that's just
Yeah.
showing. But that
I have no idea what those numbers are.
Why I threw that out there is because if you're sitting on a commission that's making decisions for Colorado and you're based out of Denver, you could look around and say, "What's the big deal?" It's like that here, and there's no problem.
Right.
And then they come down to the Valley or Trinidad. And they say, no, this is good for you, and it's doable. We did it in Denver.
Are you crazy?
Yeah, it's just part of that disconnect.
So it's perspective, right? So this was an interesting. Tell about this. You were talking to somebody about what the cost was to switch over the other day.
Yeah.
I was really glad I wasn't standing there when this person said this to you because I would have gone off.
We were actually at an event in Rye, and so we had set up an Action 22 tent in your front yard. Mm-hmm. And a lady comes over and says, "What's Action 22?" And I started explaining to her, and energy is one of these issues we're working on. And she kind of brought up this thing, and I said, I quoted kind of similar number to Brian. I'm like, it costs about $25,000 on average to switch these homes over to. And she looks me right in the face and goes, "Well, that's not very much." And I'm like, "Well, when you're living in a community where the average income is about $30,000, yeah, 25 is a lot."
So collectively, the Action 22 footprint. And if you're curious about it, go to our website and you can see the map. The Action 22 collectively, the median household income is $47,000. $47,000, and you want somebody to spend $15,000 to $20,000 to refit their house for this? This is why I get so passionate about it. I look at the burden that we routinely is discussed on the legislative level, on the regulatory level, in Colorado, of trying to do, trying to do the right thing. And I know that they're trying to do the right thing. I don't question that. What I question is the blinders that they have on for anybody outside their own community, for the rest of Colorado, the rest of the country, and right now the rest of the world. How can you think when you're looking at it on an international stage that we are going to be blessed in any way, shape, or form by taking natural gas out of it, down to the micro level, like my mom, all the way up?
Yeah.
Like how is this going to make it better? What's the ROI on this? And if you were really serious about doing this and making it clean heat, then go do that. Make what we have cleaner while everything catches up, while the grid catches up, while the discussions about transmission happen. It's that simple and that complicated. And I don't know what I'm missing on this. I don't know what I'm missing on how to rationalize this or how to really unpack this in a way that's productive. So that's my soapbox. I'm probably not going to get off of it anytime soon until we can really get these folks to genuinely consider how they can do this without doing harm to Coloradans and especially to our communities who really we cannot handle any more burden.
So what's your call to, we're Action 22 and making action happen. What's your call to action for the listeners on this?
You need to contact the PUC and tell them how you feel, whether you support what they're doing or oppose it. That public input is important. We did go to a meeting somewhere here in Pueblo, and I remember them saying like, well, not a lot of people showed up here, so let's just do the next one in Denver. And then thankfully some members that were there of this meeting, they said, you guys are always in Denver. It's good to see you outside of Denver to talk to people. But the problem was nobody showed up.
Right.
Then you went to the next one, and there was a ton of people there voicing their opinion. But you just need to comment, find out where the meetings are. You could go on their website, just Google Colorado PUC, and it lists their public hearings and their public meetings and all this stuff. Go to those meetings and let them know how this will impact you and what you think they should do.
And get educated about it. This is going to affect you in a really big way. And all of these issues are on the table for everybody to see, especially during an election year. And don't take our word for it. Go and do the research yourself. Ask the questions yourself. See what would happen. If you don't want to take our word for it, but you want to know who to ask or who to talk to, we'll help you with that too. On this one in particular, I think, I don't think there's a lot of blind spots for us on this one, but this one is going to set the stage for what Colorado looks like for generations to come on that side of it. So this was a really important one. And
it's also an election year. So contact those candidates, let them know, talk to them, say, where do you stand on this? What's your ideas? What's your thoughts? And then when they get elected, hold them accountable to it. Say, I brought this up to you 6 months ago, and now that you're in, what are you going to do about it? You said you would do this. You have to hold your legislators accountable. If they're not doing what they said, then vote them out. That just plain and simple, fire them. And we don't support or endorse candidates, but we're going to be having these discussions with them, and this is important. And right after you hear this, hopefully we'll have a good discussion with a couple of them sitting down, and we're going to ask them this.
Yeah, this will be. We're not going to let this one lie, because I think once the PUC is done, I genuinely believe, there's lots of regulatory agencies that would like to put their fingerprints on these kinds of plans.
Who's on the PUC commission right now?
Look it up.
Let me look this up because I want to know where they're from. That's another way to get involved.
Oh, they're not from here.
Okay, so when these positions come up every so often, and we try to get as many people from our area on these commissions or these groups at the state level, because we need a voice down here. If this is something you want to be involved with, I highly recommend when a position opens to apply for it submit your paperwork in, whatever the process is.
So you can't do that with the PUC, but definitely you can do that on the local level. That's one of the things that you're most impactful on is having these conversations on the local level. I think people get really caught up on politics on the national stage.
Yeah.
But where you can, what is it? Think globally, act locally. Something like that. So think nationally, but act locally. You've got it.
And I thought you could apply for the PUC. I don't know.
I think you probably do, but it's an appointed position.
Okay.
Frances Concelia used to be on that. She's a Denver lawyer, but she's very much a Pueblo person. And she's been really involved in this discussion. She calls me probably once a week to talk about this, but she's looking at it from the perspective of she has the experience to be on the PUC, so she can give a perspective on this that's pretty unique. And if you're wondering, you should reach out to her and see what she thinks about this. I'm not going to speak for her because I'm brave about a lot of things, but I'm not going to do that. So, all right, Micah, what other questions do you have? Did we answer everything, do you think?
I feel like you answered everything.
Gosh, I don't know how we could say more.
I'm sure you can think of a way.
Do you wonder how I'm feeling about this?
No.
What we feel in general about this. And by the way, usually we do the proviso on our show with, these aren't necessarily the thoughts of the Action 22 board. It's just us talking, and we put that little proviso in. I will tell you that the Action 22 board very rarely is absolute on no way, we've got to take care of this. And they're adamantly in support of everything I just talked about. We had the discussion again at the board meeting on Friday. So,
yes.
All right. So things that are coming up, what do we need to do to wrap this up? Wait, Brian's looking something up.
So here you go. The Public Utilities Commission includes 3 members who are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate for a term of 4 years.
So once they're on.
For 4 years.
For 4 years.
Yep. So
a lot can happen in 4 years.
So it's probably after every election, right? So after every gubernational governor's election in Colorado, the governor, either the new one or the one that stays in, appoints that again, and then the Senate votes to confirm it.
And if the incumbent governor wins, then they have the decision to either keep the PUC as it is or change it up. So
when is the next public hearing that we can point some of our people towards?
Great question. Well, so they're taking public comment, but that means you can go online too. So we'll get that information out to you, and we'll send it out with our email blast. But if you want, Brian, will you put that on our website so that people can know? So if you're listening and you don't get our email blast, then you can go and we'll set it up so that you can just give your comment. And you may say, Sara, Brian, and Micah are crazy and completely wrong, and this is why we think that. If that's how you feel, I'd love to have you help me understand your perspective on it if you think that we're completely off base. And we would actually love to have that conversation with you. And we'll even do it on the show if you'd like.
Yes.
All right. So we've got a lot of really great stuff coming up where it's turning into an interesting election year. We'll hope to see a lot of people down at the state fairgrounds. And then we've got the meeting of the mayors coming up. And then we have our annual meeting on
October 21st and 22nd.
October 21st and 22nd. And if you're not already a member of Action 22, but would really like to have your voice at the table, you're a leader in your community, you need to be a member of Action 22. Micah, tell them how.
Email Sara. I'm just kidding. No, you can email me as well at micah@action22.org.
Yeah, Micah.Espinoza at action22.org. And
love
Micah,
to have you.
we'll get you all set up and then you can be a part of this. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.